January 22nd, 1943. Guadalcanal. 9:17 a.m. A 27-year-old second lieutenant pressed his eye to a scope that cost him 2 years of salary. His hands were steady, his heart was not. Somewhere in the trees, 240 yards away, a Japanese sniper was hunting Americans. In the past 72 hours, 11 Japanese snipers had killed 14 men from his regiment. 14 soldiers. Dead. Shot through the head while eating breakfast. Shot through the neck while filling canteens. Shot through the chest while walking trails they had walked 100 times before. The Army sent patrols. The patrols found nothing. The Army called in artillery. The shells killed trees. The snipers climbed higher and kept shooting. Then they sent John George, a state champion marksman from Illinois. A man whose commanding officer called his rifle a toy. A man whose fellow officers laughed at his mail-order scope. In the next 96 hours, this man would kill 11 Japanese snipers with 11 shots. He would clear a jungle that an entire battalion could not secure in 2 weeks. And he would do it with a hunting rifle he bought from a catalog. This is the story of the deadliest sniper duel of the Pacific War. 6 weeks earlier, Camp Forest, Tennessee, December 1942. John George ripped open a wooden crate marked fragile. His hands trembled, not from cold, from anticipation. Inside, wrapped in oilcloth and packed in cosmoline, was the rifle he had saved 2 years to buy. A Winchester Model 70, bolt action, 5 rounds. A Lyman Alaskan scope mounted on top. "What the hell is that?" George looked up. Captain Morris stood in the tent doorway, arms crossed, eyebrow raised. "Winchester Model 70, sir. Custom ordered." Morris walked over, picked up the rifle, turned it in his hands like he was examining a broken toy. "This a joke, Lieutenant?" "No, sir. You know what we're going into out there, the Japanese. Not deer, not targets at a county fair. The Japanese." "I'm aware, sir." Morris set the rifle down. Hard. The scope rattled. "Leave this garbage in your tent. Carry a real weapon. That's an order." He walked out. George stared at the Winchester. 2 years of pay. Hundreds of hours of practice. The rifle that had won him the Illinois State Championship at 1,000 yards when he was 23 years old. The youngest winner in state history. Garbage. George picked up the rifle. Ran his thumb along the stock. The wood was smooth. The metal was cold. He carried it anyway. The 132nd Infantry landed on Guadalcanal in late December. The Marines had been fighting since August. 4 months of hell. Malaria. Dysentery. Japanese soldiers who fought like demons and died like fanatics. The Marines had taken Henderson Field. They had held it. But they were broken, exhausted. Hollow-eyed men who had seen too much death. The 182nd was supposed to finish the job. Fresh troops, full strength, ready to clear the remaining Japanese positions and end the campaign. They were not ready. The first week, they attacked Mount Austin. 500 Japanese soldiers in 47 bunkers. The fighting was brutal. Close quarters. Grenades and bayonets. Men screaming. Men dying. 16 days of combat. 34 Americans killed. 279 wounded. George fired his Winchester exactly 0 times. The jungle was wrong for his rifle. No sight lines, no distance. Just mud and trees and enemies appearing at 10 yards with bayonets fixed. Then came Point Cruz. January 19th. A corporal named Davis walked to a creek to fill canteens. He never came back. They found him face down in the water. Single shot. Through the temple. January 20th. A patrol from L Company moved through the coastal groves. 2 men dropped. Same story. Single shots. Nobody saw the shooter. January 21st. 3 more dead. One of them was shot through the neck from a tree the patrol had walked past twice. The Japanese sniper had waited. Patient. Invisible. Lethal. That night, the battalion commander summoned George to headquarters. Colonel Harrison was a big man. Thick hands, tired eyes. He had not slept in 3 days. "You're the marksman," he said, not a question. "Yes, sir." "Illinois state champion." "Yes, sir." "That mail-order rifle everyone's laughing about. Can it shoot?" George felt something shift in his chest. A door opening. "Sir, I can hit a man-sized target at 600 yards. At 300 yards, I can put 5 rounds inside 4 inches. The scope gives me visibility nobody else has." Harrison leaned forward. "I've lost 14 men in 3 days. 14. To snipers I can't see, can't find, can't kill. My patrols are useless. My artillery is useless. My men are terrified to leave their foxholes." He pointed at George. "You have until morning. Kill one of those snipers, just one. Prove that rifle isn't a waste of cargo space." George saluted. "Yes, sir." He walked back to his tent. His heart was pounding. His mind was racing. One sniper, just one. He could do this. He would do this. George cleaned his Winchester that night. It did not need cleaning. He had cleaned it twice already, but his hands needed something to do while his mind processed what was coming. Tomorrow, he would kill a man. Not in the chaos of a firefight. Not in the confusion of a bonsai charge. He would look through his scope. He would find a human being. He would center the crosshairs on that human being's chest, and he would squeeze the trigger. Could he do it? George's hands stopped moving. The cleaning rod hung motionless in the barrel. He thought about Davis, face down in the creek, 22 years old, a wife in Ohio. He thought about the 3 men killed yesterday. One of them was a sergeant named Williams. Williams had shared his cigarettes with George during the ocean crossing. He thought about the Japanese sniper who killed Williams. Sitting in a tree, waiting, patient, squeezing the trigger without hesitation. George's jaw tightened. Yes, he could do it. Dawn. January 22nd. George moved into position in the ruins of a Japanese bunker 200 yards from the tree line. The bunker had been captured 3 days earlier. It smelled like death and cordite. The sandbags were ripped open. Dirt spilled across the floor. George settled behind a broken wall. He rested the Winchester on a sandbag. He pressed his eye to the scope. 2.5 power magnification. Not much, but enough. The jungle filled his vision. Green, dense, shadows everywhere. Every branch could hide a man. Every shadow could be a rifle barrel. George began to scan. Left to right, top to bottom, slow, methodical. The way he had scanned targets at Camp Perry 1,000 times before. Except these targets shot back. His heart was beating too fast. His breathing was shallow. His palms were sweating. Stop. George closed his eyes. 3 deep breaths. In through the nose, out through the mouth. This is no different than competition. Find the target. Control your breathing. Squeeze the trigger. He opened his eyes, resumed scanning. 8:30, nothing. 8:45, nothing. 9:00. His neck was cramping. His eyes were burning. 9:15. A bird flew from a banyan tree 240 yards away. George froze. Birds do not fly without reason. He focused on that tree. The trunk was 8 feet thick. The branches spread outward like fingers. Deep shadows, perfect concealment. 9:16. A branch moved, no wind. The other branches were still. George's heart stopped. 9:17. The branch moved again. And George saw him. A shape. Dark clothing. Pressed into a fork where 3 branches met. The Japanese sniper was facing east, watching the trail where American supply parties moved. He had not seen George. George adjusted his scope. 2 clicks right for wind. He controlled his breathing. 1 deep breath. Let half out. Hold. His finger touched the trigger. 3.5 pounds of pressure. Glass smooth. the crosshairs centered on the dark shape. George's vision narrowed. The jungle disappeared. The sounds disappeared. There was only the scope, only the target, only the space between heartbeats. He squeezed. The Winchester kicked. The sound cracked through the jungle. Loud, sharp, final. 240 yards away, the Japanese sniper jerked. His body fell backward. He dropped through the branches, tumbling, spinning, 90 feet down. His rifle clattered through the leaves ahead of him. He hit the ground with a sound George heard even from 240 yards away. George worked the bolt, the empty cartridge ejected, brass spinning in the morning light. He chambered another round. His hands were shaking. He had just killed a man. George forced himself to breathe. In through the nose, out through the mouth. Focus. There would be another one. Japanese snipers worked in pairs, shooter and spotter. If George had killed the shooter, the spotter was nearby. Watching, waiting, already calculating where that shot came from. George scanned the trees, methodical, patient. His hands stopped shaking. 9:25. Nothing. 9:35. Nothing. 9:43. Movement. Different tree. 60 yards north of the first. Lower. Maybe 50 feet up. The Japanese sniper was moving, climbing down the trunk, retreating. He had heard the shot. He knew his partner was dead. He was trying to escape. George tracked the movement, led the target slightly. The man was descending fast, hand over hand, 10 feet per second. George aimed, exhaled, squeezed. The second sniper fell backward. His arms flew outward. His rifle tumbled after him. Both hit the jungle floor within seconds. 2 shots. 2 kills. George reloaded from a stripper clip. 5 fresh rounds. His breathing was steady now. His hands were calm. This was what he was born to do. By noon, John George had killed 5 Japanese snipers. 5 shots. 5 kills. Word spread through the battalion like wildfire. Did you hear the lieutenant with the mail-order rifle? 5 Japs. 5. Bullshit. Go ask Captain Morris. He saw the bodies. Captain Morris stood outside the command bunker. The same Captain Morris who had called George's rifle garbage. Lieutenant George. Sir? Morris looked at him for a long moment. The mockery was gone from his eyes. Something else had replaced it. Respect. The colonel wants you back in position at dawn tomorrow. Yes, sir. Morris hesitated. Then he extended his hand. Good shooting, Lieutenant. George shook it. Thank you, sir. He walked back to his tent. His legs felt weak. The adrenaline was fading. The reality was setting in. 5 men dead, by his hand, through his scope. He sat on his cot. The Winchester lay across his lap. He stared at the wall and saw nothing. 5 men, alive this morning, dead now. George's hands began to shake again. Not from fear, from something else, something he did not have a name for. He cleaned his rifle. It did not need cleaning, but his hands needed something to do. Tomorrow he would go back out. The Japanese still had 6 snipers in those trees, 6 men who now knew someone was hunting them, 6 men who would be watching. Waiting, planning. Tomorrow would be different. Tomorrow they would be hunting him. George loaded 5 fresh rounds into the Winchester. He lay down on his cot. He closed his eyes. Sleep did not come. At 3 a.m., he gave up trying. He sat in the darkness with his rifle across his lap and waited for dawn. In Part 2, we will see how the remaining Japanese snipers set an elaborate trap for George. How a mortar barrage nearly killed him. How he was forced to hide in a water-filled crater while enemy soldiers hunted him through the jungle. And how the final confrontation with the last 2 snipers would push John George to the absolute limit of his skill, his courage, and his will to survive. The duel was just beginning. January 22, 1943, Guadalcanal, sunset. John George had killed 5 Japanese snipers in a single day. 5 shots. 5 kills. A mail-order rifle that his commanding officer called garbage had just done what an entire battalion could not accomplish in 2 weeks. But 6 Japanese snipers remained in the Point Cruz groves. 6 men who now knew they were being hunted. 6 men who had survived longer than their dead comrades for a reason. They were smarter, more patient, more dangerous. And overnight, they would set a trap designed specifically to kill John George. The mathematics were simple. George had revealed his position with every shot. The Japanese knew approximately where he was operating. They knew he used a scoped rifle. They knew he worked alone. And they knew that if they wanted to survive, they had to kill him before he killed them. George understood this. He sat in his tent that night, cleaning a rifle that did not need cleaning, and calculated his odds. 6 snipers remaining, each one now on high alert, each one watching for him, each one ready to shoot the moment he revealed himself. Tomorrow would not be like today. Tomorrow, they would be hunting him. January 23rd, 05:30. The rain started before dawn. Heavy tropical rain. The kind that turned the jungle floor into soup and reduced visibility to nothing. George could not see past 50 yards. The trees were shadows. The groves were ghosts. He sat in the ruins of the bunker and waited. Water dripped through the shattered roof. His uniform was soaked. His rifle was wrapped in oilcloth to keep the scope dry. 8:15. The rain slowed. 8:16. Visibility improved. George unwrapped his Winchester and began scanning. 8:17. Movement. A banyan tree, 290 yards out. Longer range than yesterday. The Japanese sniper had climbed into position during the rain. Smart. The sound of rain masked movement. The reduced visibility provided cover. They were adapting. George compensated for distance. He controlled his breathing. He squeezed the trigger. The sniper fell. 6 kills. And then the world exploded. 957. The first mortar round landed 40 yards short of George's position. The explosion threw dirt and debris into the air. The sound was deafening. George's blood went cold. They had triangulated his position. Muzzle flash. Sound. The Japanese had calculated where he was firing from and called in mortars. The second salvo landed 20 yards short. The third would hit the bunker. George grabbed his rifle and ran. He sprinted north along the tree line. Vines grabbed his boots. Branches whipped his face. Behind him, the third salvo hit. The bunker he had occupied 3 seconds earlier disappeared in a fountain of flame and flying sandbags. George dove into a shell crater, pressed himself into the mud, gasped for breath. His hands were shaking. His heart was hammering. He had almost died. Focus. He forced himself to breathe, in through the nose, out through the mouth. The Japanese had adapted. They were not just hiding anymore. They were fighting back, coordinating, using combined arms. This was no longer a shooting competition. This was war. George relocated to a fallen tree 120 yards north of the destroyed bunker. He settled in, resumed scanning. His hands were steady again. His breathing was controlled. But something had changed inside him. The Japanese were not targets anymore. They were enemies. Intelligent, capable, deadly. And they wanted him dead as badly as he wanted them dead. 14:23. George spotted another sniper. This one was well concealed, deep in the shadows of a massive banyan. George took his time, controlled his breathing, squeezed. 7 kills. 15:41. Another sniper. This one had climbed high, 94 feet up. Good concealment. But the afternoon sun had shifted. The sniper's silhouette was visible against the sky for exactly 3 seconds. George did not need 3 seconds. 8 kills. 1700. A runner arrived from battalion headquarters. Captain Morris wanted George back. Now. George had been in position for 11 hours. He had killed 3 snipers. He had survived a mortar barrage. He had relocated twice under fire. He was exhausted, dehydrated, running on adrenaline and willpower. But 3 Japanese snipers still remained. George reported to Colonel Harrison at 17:30. 8 confirmed kills, George said. 12 rounds fired against snipers. 8 hits, 4 misses. Harrison studied him. "You look like hell, Lieutenant." "The Japanese called in mortars on my position, sir. They're adapting." "I heard the explosions. Thought we lost you." "Almost, sir." Harrison leaned back in his chair. His eyes were calculating, weighing options. 3 snipers left." "Yes, sir." "Can you finish them?" George hesitated. For the first time since this mission began, he was not certain. "Sir, the remaining 3 are the best. They've survived 2 days while I killed 8 of their comrades. They know my tactics. They know my rifle. They know approximately where I operate. Tomorrow, they'll be waiting for me." "What do you need?" George thought for a moment. "Permission to operate from a different sector. They'll expect me to return to the same area. I need to approach from somewhere unexpected." Harrison nodded. "Granted. What else?" "Nothing, sir. Just time." "You have until sundown tomorrow. After that, we're moving east. The Japanese are evacuating. Intelligence says 2 weeks, maybe less. The Point Cruz groves won't matter once they're gone." George saluted. "Understood, sir." He walked back to his tent. His legs were heavy. His eyes were burning. He needed sleep. 8 hours minimum. He got 3. At 0300, George woke in darkness. His mind was racing. The remaining 3 snipers would not make the mistakes their dead comrades had made. They would be watching different sectors. They would be positioned to cover each other. They would be waiting. George needed a new approach. He lay in the darkness and planned. January 24th, 0530. Rain again. George used the rain to move into a new position. Not the bunker, not the fallen tree. Somewhere the Japanese would not expect. He chose a cluster of large rocks 70 yards south of his previous positions. The Marines had used it as a machine gun nest back in December. Good cover, good sight lines. But far enough from his previous locations that the Japanese would not be watching it. He settled in, waited for the rain to stop, waited for the hunt to resume. 7:43. The rain slowed. Visibility improved. 7:44. George spotted movement. A palm tree 190 yards out. Low. Only 40 feet up. Unusual. Most snipers climbed high for better sight lines. This one had chosen concealment over elevation. The palm fronds created a natural hide. George could see the dark shape of shoulders and head. An easy shot. Too easy. George's finger froze on the trigger. Something was wrong. He had been hunting snipers for 3 days. He had killed 8 men. The remaining 3 were the best, the smartest, the most experienced. They would not make elementary mistakes. They would not position themselves in obvious locations. Unless it was bait. George lowered his rifle. His heart was pounding. He forced himself to think. If the sniper in the palm was bait, where was the real threat? George scanned the surrounding trees. Methodical, patient. Every tree within 300 yards of the palm. He checked branches, shadows, forks where 3 limbs met. 11 minutes of searching. 828. He found it. A banyan tree 80 yards northwest of the palm. 91 feet up. Perfect concealment. Branches and vines covered 3 sides. But George could see a dark shape. Motionless. Watching. The real sniper was covering the bait. Waiting for someone to take the shot at the palm. Waiting for the muzzle flash that would reveal the shooter's position. George had 2 problems. First, if he shot the real sniper, the sound would reveal his position. The bait in the palm would relocate before George could chamber another round. Second, if he shot the bait first, the real sniper would see his muzzle flash and return fire before George could swing to the second target. He needed to kill both. Fast. George made his decision. He aimed at the bait in the palm tree, adjusted for wind, squeezed. The decoy jerked and fell from the palm. George worked the bolt, chambered another round, swung the rifle toward the banyan tree. The real sniper would react to the shot. He would turn toward the sound. That turn would create movement. George saw it. A slight shift. The sniper was repositioning. George put the crosshairs on the dark shape and fired before the sniper could fully turn. The real sniper fell. His rifle tumbled after him. 2 shots, 2 kills, 10 confirmed kills, 1 sniper remaining. But George had revealed his position. He grabbed his rifle and ran, moved east along the rock line, dropped into a drainage ditch 40 yards away. 834. Japanese machine gun fire raked the rocks where he had been positioned 6 seconds earlier. The bullets kicked up dust and stone fragments. The fire lasted 17 seconds. When it stopped, George counted to 60. Then he moved again. Relocated to a shell crater 100 yards east. The crater was half filled with rainwater. George settled into it with water up to his chest. He rested the Winchester on the crater rim. 10 kills. 1 remaining. The 11th sniper would be the best. The smartest. The most dangerous. He had watched 10 comrades die over 3 days. He knew George's tactics. He knew George's rifle. Somewhere in those trees he was watching, waiting, planning. George scanned the jungle through his scope. 9:47. He realized his mistake. The 11th sniper was not in the trees. He was on the ground. George saw the movement at the edge of his peripheral vision, 60 yards south, low to the ground. A shape moving through the undergrowth. The Japanese sniper was crawling toward George's last known position at the rocks. George remained motionless in the water. The Winchester was shouldered, but the angle was wrong. The crater rim blocked his view. He would have to rise up to get a clear shot. Rising up would expose him. The Japanese sniper stopped moving at 0952. He had reached a position 40 yards from the rocks. He was studying them, searching for movement. George waited. Patience. Let the target come to you. 9:58. The sniper began moving again, crawling forward, 35 yards from the rocks. 30, 25, 959. The Japanese sniper reached the rocks. He moved into the machine gun nest, took up a position facing east, toward the drainage ditch, toward where George should have been. His back was exposed. 38 yards, an easy shot. But George hesitated. This man had survived 10 days in these groves. He had outlived 10 other snipers. He did not make mistakes. This had to be another trap. George expanded his awareness, scanned the surrounding area. 1006. He found it. A second Japanese soldier, 70 yards northwest. Behind a fallen tree trunk, rifle aimed toward the drainage ditch. 2 men. The 11th sniper had brought support. Or perhaps these were the final 2 snipers. Numbers 10 and 11, working together. George could not shoot both before they reacted. He needed a different approach. George slowly lowered himself deeper into the water, submerged until only his eyes and the top of his head remained above the surface. He held the Winchester vertically to keep water out of the barrel. Then he waited. 10:13. The Japanese soldier in the rocks stood up. He had seen nothing in the drainage ditch. He believed George had moved farther east. He turned and signaled to his partner. Both men began moving east, parallel to each other, 70 yards apart, executing a sweep, planning to flush George out. George remained in the water, motionless, invisible. The 2 Japanese soldiers moved past his crater. Their backs were now exposed. George rose from the water, slowly, silently. Water dripped from the barrel, from his uniform, from his face. He aimed at the closer soldier. 42 yards. Fired. The soldier dropped. George worked the bolt, chambered another round, swung toward the second soldier. The man was turning, raising his rifle. George fired first. The second soldier fell. 11 shots. 11 kills. The Point Cruz groves were clear. But as George climbed out of the crater, he heard something that made his blood freeze. Voices. Japanese voices. Coming from the tree line, multiple men, moving toward the fallen soldiers. George had killed the snipers, but the snipers had not been working alone. George dropped back into the crater. The water was cold. Muddy. He submerged again, held the Winchester vertical. Watched. The voices grew louder. At least 6 men. Infantry. A patrol or recovery team sent to collect the bodies. They stopped at the first body. 42 yards from George's crater. He could hear them clearly. Urgent tones. Commands. Then they moved to the second body. Then they found his tracks. Boot prints in the mud. Leading from the rocks. To the crater. George had 5 rounds. 6 Japanese soldiers. The voices grew closer. 30 yards. 25. 20. 10:31. A Japanese soldier appeared at the crater rim, looking down, directly at George. Their eyes met. George fired from the water. The soldier fell backward. George worked the bolt while submerged. Rose up. 2 more soldiers at the crater rim. He fired, worked the bolt, fired. Both dropped. 3 rounds remaining. 3 soldiers remaining. George climbed out of the crater on the north side, ran 20 yards, dropped behind a fallen tree. Japanese rifle fire cracked through the jungle. Bullets struck the ground around him. The soldiers were firing at movement, at sound. George stayed low, glassed the area through the scope, saw movement. 2 soldiers advancing, 50 yards out. He aimed, fired. 1 dropped. 2 rounds remaining. More voices, behind him. The Japanese were flanking. George made his decision. He could not win this firefight. 5 rounds against multiple soldiers with semi-automatic weapons. He needed to break contact. He grabbed his rifle and ran. 90 seconds of sprinting through the jungle. Vines catching his boots. Branches whipping his face. Bullets snapping past. He dove into another shell crater. Dry this time. Pressed himself against the wall. Listened. The voices were distant now. The Japanese had not pursued. George checked his rifle. 2 rounds left. His ammunition was in his pack. His pack was somewhere near the water-filled crater. 11:47. George reached the American perimeter. A Marine sentry challenged him. George identified himself. He walked to battalion headquarters. Colonel Harrison was waiting. Report. 11 Japanese snipers eliminated, sir. All confirmed. Then I engaged an infantry patrol. 3 additional kills. I'm down to 2 rounds. Harrison stared at him. For a long moment, neither man spoke. 11 snipers. 4 days. Yes, sir. With a mail-order rifle. Yes, sir. Harrison extended his hand. George shook it. Get some rest, Lieutenant. You've earned it. George walked back to his tent. His legs were shaking. His hands were shaking. His entire body was shaking. 11 men dead. By his hand. Through his scope. He sat on his cot. The Winchester lay across his lap. The barrel was still wet. Mud caked the stock. The scope was fogged. He began cleaning. His hands moved automatically. His mind was somewhere else, somewhere in the trees, somewhere in the water, somewhere between the crosshairs and the dark shapes that fell when he squeezed the trigger. George cleaned his rifle for 3 hours. When he finished, he loaded 5 fresh rounds. Then he lay down and slept for 14 hours straight. He did not dream. But John George's war was not over. Not even close. In Part 3, we will see how Colonel Ferry summoned George to regimental headquarters with an extraordinary request. How George was ordered to create an entire sniper section from scratch. How he trained 40 men in 2 weeks. And how those men would kill 74 Japanese soldiers in 12 days of operations. But we will also see how the Japanese adapted. How they began hunting George's snipers the way George had hunted their snipers. And how a Japanese bullet would finally find John George himself. The hunter was about to become the hunted. January 25th, 1943, Guadalcanal. John George had done the impossible. A state champion marksman with a mail-order rifle had killed 11 Japanese snipers in 4 days. He had cleared the Point Cruz groves when an entire battalion could not. He had survived a mortar barrage, a machine gun ambush, and a 6-man infantry patrol. But the war was not waiting for him to recover. Colonel Ferry, commander of the 182nd Infantry Regiment, had been watching George's performance from the beginning. He had seen the casualty reports. 14 Americans dead in 72 hours. Then George arrived. 11 Japanese snipers eliminated. 0 American casualties during sniper operations. The mathematics were undeniable. One trained marksman with a proper rifle had accomplished more than 200 men with standard weapons. And Ferry had a question that would change everything. Could George teach others to do what he had done January 26th? 0800, Regimental Headquarters. George stood at attention before Colonel Ferry. His shoulder still ached from the recoil of 200 rounds fired over 4 days. His eyes still burned from hours of scanning through a scope. His mind still replayed the faces of the men he had killed. Ferry studied him for a long moment. Lieutenant George, I've read Captain Morris's report. 11 confirmed kills. 12 rounds fired against snipers. 11 hits. Yes, sir. That's a 92% hit rate in combat conditions. Yes, sir. Ferry leaned forward. His eyes were intense, calculating. I have 14 Springfield rifles with unertl scopes. The Marines left them behind. I have 40 men in this regiment who qualified as expert marksmen before deployment. I want you to turn them into snipers. George felt something shift in his chest. This was bigger than hunting individual enemies. This was building something, creating a capability that did not exist. Sir, sniper training typically takes months. Marksmanship is only part of it. Concealment, stalking, target selection, fieldcraft. I can teach shooting in a week. The rest takes longer. You have 2 weeks. Sir. 2 weeks, Lieutenant. The Japanese are evacuating Guadalcanal. Intelligence says they'll be gone by mid-February. I need your snipers operational before they leave. I want them killing Japanese soldiers during the evacuation. George calculated. 2 weeks. 40 men. 14 rifles. It was not enough time. Not enough equipment, not enough of anything. But he had not had enough time when he entered the Point Cruz groves either. He had not had the right equipment. He had not had support. He had done it anyway. Yes, sir. I'll need the rifles, ammunition, and dedicated range time. No other duties for my trainees. Ferry nodded. You'll have it. And George, sir. Those men are watching you. The whole regiment is watching. What you did in those groves is already becoming legend. Don't let them down. George saluted. I won't, sir. He walked out of headquarters with the weight of 40 lives on his shoulders. January 27th, 0600. Training began. George assembled his 40 candidates at a makeshift range 2 miles east of Henderson Field. The men stood in formation. Some of them were young. 18, 19 years old. Some were older. Veterans of Mount Austin. They had seen combat. They had killed. But none of them had killed the way George had killed. George studied their faces. He saw curiosity, respect, fear. Good. Fear would keep them alive. My name is Lieutenant George. You've heard what I did in the Point Cruz groves. Forget it. That was me. This is you. What I did means nothing unless you can do it too. He held up his Winchester. This rifle killed 11 Japanese snipers. But the rifle did not aim itself. The rifle did not control its breathing. The rifle did not wait for the right moment to squeeze the trigger. I did. He set the Winchester down and picked up one of the Springfield rifles. This is what you'll be using. Springfield Model 1903A4. Bolt action. 5 rounds. Unertl 8 power scope. Heavier than my Winchester. Longer range. more powerful, but the same principles apply. George looked at the men. Sniper work is not about shooting. Any soldier can shoot. Sniper work is about killing. There's a difference. Shooting is mechanical. Pull the trigger, bullet leaves the barrel. Killing is psychological. You find a man, you watch him, you study him, you wait until he's in the perfect position. Then you end his life. He paused. Some of you will not be able to do this. That's fine. I'll find out who you are and send you back to your units. No shame. This work is not for everyone. George pointed at the targets downrange. But for those of you who can do this, I'm going to teach you how to be the most dangerous men in this jungle. When I'm done with you, the Japanese will fear your rifles the way they feared mine. Training was brutal. Day 1. Fundamentals. Breathing control. Trigger squeeze. Natural point of aim. George discovered that expert marksmanship on a qualification range meant nothing in the field. Half the men had developed bad habits. Jerking the trigger, holding their breath too long, anticipating recoil. George broke them down, rebuilt their technique from scratch. Day 2. Position shooting, prone, sitting, kneeling, using terrain for support. The jungle rarely offered perfect positions. George had them shooting from behind logs, from inside craters, from the forks of trees. Day 3. Moving targets. George had men walk across the range at varying speeds. The trainees learned to lead, to anticipate, to time their shots. Day 4. Range estimation. No rangefinders. Just eyes and judgment. George taught them reference points. A man's shoulders are 18 inches wide. Adjust for distance accordingly. Day 5. Concealment. How to hide. How to move without being seen. How to build a position that would be invisible from 10 yards away. By the end of the first week, George had eliminated 12 candidates. They could shoot. They could not kill. The difference showed in their eyes when George described what it felt like to watch a man fall through a scope. 28 men remained. Day 8. 2-man teams. Shooter and spotter. George paired the men based on compatibility. The spotter carried binoculars and a garand. His job was to find targets and provide security. The shooter engaged. Day 9. Live fire exercises. George set up targets in the jungle. The teams had to locate them, identify them, and engage. No coaching, no help. Just the skills they had learned. Day 10. Night operations. Moving into position before dawn. Waiting in darkness. Engaging at first light. By January 30th, 32 men could consistently hit man-sized targets at 300 yards under field conditions. George divided them into 16 2-man teams. February 1st, 0400. The sniper section moved out. George led 4 teams into the jungle west of the Mataniku River. Intelligence indicated Japanese soldiers were still operating in that area. Stragglers, rear guard units, men covering the evacuation. George paired with Corporal Hayes, a 24-year-old from Texas, who could shoot almost as well as George himself. They set up on high ground overlooking a trail the Japanese had been using for resupply. 720. Movement on the trail. Hayes spotted him first. Contact. Single soldier, 180 yards, moving north. George acquired the target through his scope. A Japanese soldier carrying a supply pack, probably moving ammunition to a forward position. Confirmed. I have the shot. George controlled his breathing. Squeezed. The soldier dropped. Hit. Target down. Hayes was already scanning. Second contact. 200 yards, behind the first. He's running. George worked the bolt. Found the second soldier through his scope. The man was sprinting for cover. George led him. Squeezed. Hit. Target down. Over the next 6 hours, George and Hayes engaged 7 Japanese soldiers on that trail. 7 shots. 6 kills. 1 miss due to wind. The other 3 teams reported similar results. End of day totals. 23 Japanese soldiers killed. 0 American casualties. February 2nd. The sniper section expanded operations. George sent teams to different sectors: the Point Cruz area, the Matanicu River crossings, the trails leading to Cape Esperance. The results were devastating. Day 2, 18 kills. Day 3, 22 kills. Day 4, 11 kills. The Japanese were adapting, moving at night, using different trails. But George adapted faster. He repositioned his teams, set up ambush points on the new routes, waited for the Japanese to reveal themselves. Day 5, 19 kills. Day 6, 8 kills. Day 7, 14 kills. The Japanese were terrified. Their evacuation was becoming a slaughter. Men who should have been loading onto destroyers at Cape Esperance were dying in the jungle before they ever reached the coast. Japanese commanders ordered night movement only. No daytime activity. No exposed positions. It did not matter. George's snipers had learned to anticipate. They set up before dawn. They waited. They watched the trails the Japanese would use after darkness fell. They engaged at last light and first light when visibility was marginal, but targets were moving. By February 7th, the sniper section had killed 74 Japanese soldiers in 12 days of operations. 74 confirmed kills. 0 friendly casualties during sniper operations. The numbers were staggering. One platoon of 16 teams had inflicted more casualties than some companies had managed in weeks of fighting, and they had done it without losing a single man. But on February 7th, the hunters became the hunted. George was operating near the Tenambogo River with Corporal Hayes. They had set up in a concealed position overlooking a Japanese supply route. The morning had been quiet. No movement, no targets. 10:43. Hayes spotted something. Movement, 300 yards, northeast, in the tree line. George scanned, found nothing. I don't see it. It's there, just inside the shadows. Something moved. George kept scanning. The jungle was dense, dark. Every shadow could hide a man. Wait. I see. Something. Can't identify. He adjusted his scope. Tried to find the shape Hayes had spotted. 10:44. A Japanese bullet hit George in the left shoulder. The impact was like being struck by a hammer. George spun, dropped. The Winchester fell from his hands, pain blinding, overwhelming. "Lieutenant?" Hayes was beside him, dragging him behind cover. Bullets cracked over their heads. "How bad?" George looked at his shoulder. Blood. A lot of blood. But the arm still moved, nothing broken. "Through and through. I'll live. Did you see the shooter?" Hayes shook his head. "Negative. He's in the tree line somewhere, 300 yards. A Japanese sniper. Hunting the hunters." George's vision was blurring. Blood loss. Shock. He forced himself to focus. "Get me out of here. Call for the corpsman." Hayes threw George's arm over his shoulder. They moved south, staying low, using terrain for cover. The Japanese sniper fired twice more. Both missed. They reached friendly lines at 11:27. A corpsman met them, cut away George's uniform, examined the wound. "You're lucky, Lieutenant. Clean entry, clean exit. No bone, no major vessels. You'll keep the arm." George lay on the stretcher, stared at the sky. His left arm was on fire. His mind was racing. 74 kills. 12 days. 1 wound. Acceptable odds. But his war was over. The doctors said 3 weeks minimum before he could return to combat. By then, the Japanese would be gone from Guadalcanal. February 9th. American forces reached Cape Esperance. The Japanese had completed their evacuation. 13,000 soldiers extracted by destroyer over 3 nights. The Guadalcanal campaign was over. George's sniper section was officially recognized by division headquarters. Colonel Ferry recommended George for a Bronze Star. The citation mentioned the 11 personal kills and the 74 kills achieved by his trainees. 85 Japanese soldiers, dead, because one man with a mail-order rifle had proven that individual marksmanship still mattered in modern warfare. But George did not care about medals. He lay in the field hospital near Henderson Field. His shoulder was bandaged. His arm was in a sling. His Winchester was packed in a waterproof case beside his cot. A runner arrived on February 12th. Orders from Pacific Command. They needed experienced combat officers for a new mission. Something in Burma. Something classified. George volunteered without knowing the details. He could not shoot. He could not lead his sniper teams. But he could still serve. By March, he was on a transport ship heading west. His Winchester traveled with him, packed in cosmoline again, wrapped in oilcloth. The rifle that had killed 11 Japanese snipers on Guadalcanal was heading to a new war. A war that would be even more brutal than anything George had experienced. The transport reached India on April 3rd. George and 200 other officers were briefed on their assignment. They would join a new unit. 3,000 men total. Long-range penetration. Deep behind Japanese lines. No supply lines. No artillery support. No rescue. The unit had no official designation yet. The men called themselves something else. They called themselves Merrill's Marauders. And in the jungles of Burma, John George would face challenges that made Guadalcanal look simple. 700 miles of marching through impossible terrain. Malaria, dysentery, typhus. An enemy that knew the ground better than any American force, and combat so close that his scoped rifle would become almost useless. But that is a story for Part 4. In the final chapter of John George's War, we will see how the Marauders captured Mayat-Kina airfield against impossible odds. How George used his Winchester only 7 times in 3 months of operations. How the man who had killed 11 snipers in 4 days would discover the limits of what individual skill could accomplish. And we will learn what happened to John George after the war, the career he built, the book he wrote, the rifle that now sits in a museum where most visitors walk past without stopping. The conclusion of this story reveals something unexpected, something that changes everything you think you know about John George. A state champion marksman from Illinois. A hunting rifle he bought through the mail. 11 Japanese snipers killed in 4 days. A sniper school that produced 74 confirmed kills in 12 days. A wound that nearly ended his career. And a journey to Burma that would test everything he had learned. John George had proven that one man with the right rifle and the right training could change the course of a battle. He had built something from nothing. He had turned mockery into respect. He had transformed a mail-order sweetheart into a weapon that terrified the Japanese. But what happened to the man behind the rifle? What happened after the war ended and the guns fell silent? This story has one final chapter that most people have never heard. A chapter about legacy, about memory, about what happens to heroes when the world moves on. And it begins with a question that haunted John George for the rest of his life. Was any of it worth it? Burma? 1944. The jungles of Burma were nothing like Guadalcanal. Steeper terrain, heavier rainfall, denser vegetation. An enemy that had been fighting in this landscape for years and knew every trail, every river crossing, every ambush point. Merrill's Marauders entered Burma in February 1944. Their mission was to march 700 miles through impossible terrain and capture Mayat-Kina airfield. No supply lines, no artillery support, no rescue if things went wrong. George carried his Winchester Model 70, the rifle that had killed 11 snipers on Guadalcanal, the rifle that had made him a legend. But in Burma, that rifle was almost useless. The fighting was different. Close quarters, 30 yards, 20 yards, sometimes bayonet range. The jungle was so thick that George could not see past 50 feet in any direction. His scope designed for 300-yard shots became a liability, too slow to acquire targets, too narrow a field of view. George used his Winchester only 7 times in 3 months of operations. 7 shots, 7 kills. But 7 kills in 3 months compared to 11 in 4 days. The mathematics told a story George did not want to hear. His skills were not universal. His rifle was not magical. He had been the right man in the right place at the right time on Guadalcanal. In Burma, he was just another infantry officer trying to survive. The march broke men. Malaria infected 90% of the marauders. Dysentery left soldiers too weak to walk. Typhus killed men who had survived a dozen firefights. The unit that entered Burma with 997 men finished the campaign with fewer than 200 still capable of combat. George survived. His Winchester survived. But something inside him had changed. He had seen the limits of what individual skill could accomplish. He had seen men die despite being the best soldiers he had ever known. He had seen courage fail against disease and exhaustion and an enemy that simply would not stop fighting. May 17, 1944. The marauders captured Myitkyina airfield. The mission was complete. But at what cost? George was evacuated with the remnants of his unit. The marauders were disbanded. The survivors were scattered to other commands. The unit that had accomplished the impossible was erased from the order of battle as if it had never existed. George returned to the United States in July 1944. The Army promoted him to captain and assigned him to Fort Benning, Georgia. Training duties: teaching infantry officers the lessons he had learned on Guadalcanal and in Burma. He taught marksmanship. He taught small unit tactics. He taught jungle warfare. Young officers sat in his classes and listened to stories about killing snipers at 240 yards and surviving mortar barrages and hunting men through the jungle. They did not understand. They could not understand. They had not been there. George kept his Winchester. The rifle sat in a footlocker in his quarters. He rarely looked at it. The war had moved beyond individual marksmen with personal weapons. The military was standardizing. Mass production, interchangeable parts, soldiers with identical equipment and identical training. The age of the craftsman soldier was ending. January 1947. George was discharged from the Army. Lieutenant Colonel, 2 Bronze Stars, 1 Purple Heart. Combat Infantry Badge, a service record that would have made most men proud for a lifetime. George felt empty. He enrolled at Princeton University on the GI Bill. He studied politics, graduated with highest honors in 1950. Then Oxford for 4 years. Then British East Africa for 4 years, studying regional politics and institutions. He built a second career: Executive Director of the Institute of African American Relations, consultant to the State Department's Foreign Affairs Institute, lecturer on African affairs. He never spoke publicly about Guadalcanal or Burma. His colleagues knew he had served in the Pacific, but they did not know about Point Cruz. They did not know about the 11 snipers. They did not know about the mail-order rifle that had made him a legend among men he would never see again. George kept his silence for 2 years after the war ended. Then he decided to write, not for publication, just for his own record. He wanted to document the weapons and tactics of jungle warfare while the details were still fresh in his mind. He wrote for 6 months. The manuscript grew to over 400 pages. Detailed descriptions of rifles, ammunition, ballistics. Technical analysis of what worked and what failed. A friend at the National Rifle Association read the manuscript and suggested publication. George was reluctant. The book was technical, dry, not the kind of content that interested general readers, but the NRA convinced him. 1947. The book was published under the title Shots Fired in Anger. It became a classic. Firearms enthusiasts studied it for decades. Military historians referenced it in their research. Collectors used it to identify and evaluate World War II weapons. The book described George's experiences with clinical precision. No embellishment, no hero worship, just facts and observations about what worked and what did not work in combat. But there was something else in those pages, something between the lines. A quiet pride in what he had accomplished, a deep respect for the enemies he had faced, and a profound understanding that war was not about glory or medals or recognition. War was about survival, about doing what needed to be done, about finding the strength to pull the trigger when another man's life depended on it. The book is still in print today, but the legacy John George left behind extends far beyond a single book. When George created his sniper section on Guadalcanal in January 1943, the United States Army had no formal sniper training program. Snipers were an afterthought, individual marksmen with whatever rifles they could find. No doctrine, no standardized equipment, no institutional support. George changed that. His sniper section proved that trained marksmen with proper equipment could achieve results far beyond their numbers. 74 kills in 12 days. 0 friendly casualties. A force multiplier that no commander could ignore. After Guadalcanal, the Army began taking snipers seriously. Training programs were established. Equipment was standardized. Doctrine was developed. The lessons George had learned through trial and error in the Point Cruz groves became the foundation for a new approach to precision warfare. Korea, Vietnam, Iraq, Afghanistan. Every American sniper who has served in the past 80 years owes something to John George. The two-man team concept. Shooter and spotter. The emphasis on concealment and patience. The understanding that one well-placed shot is worth 1,000 rounds of automatic fire. These principles did not exist in American military doctrine before George proved their value. The numbers are staggering when you consider the full scope of his influence. American snipers have confirmed over 100,000 kills since World War II. They have saved countless lives by eliminating enemy commanders, machine gunners, and explosive experts before they could cause mass casualties. They have provided reconnaissance that shaped entire campaigns. And it all traces back to a state champion marksman with a mail-order rifle who refused to accept that his weapon was garbage. But the technical legacy is only part of the story. George proved something more fundamental, something that applies far beyond the battlefield. He proved that innovation can come from anywhere. The generals did not develop sniper doctrine. The war planners did not request precision marksmen. The idea came from a junior officer with a personal rifle and the skills to use it. He proved that institutions resist change even when change is desperately needed. Captain Morris dismissed George's rifle as a toy. The Army had no place for individual marksmen in its table of organization. The system was designed to suppress innovation, not encourage it. He proved that persistence matters more than approval. George carried his Winchester despite orders to leave it behind. He volunteered for the sniper mission when no one else would. He trained 40 men in 2 weeks when doctrine said it should take months. These are not lessons limited to warfare. Every entrepreneur who has been told their idea is crazy. Every scientist who has been rejected by the establishment. Every artist who has been dismissed by critics. They all face the same challenge George faced in that tent in Tennessee when Captain Morris told him to leave his rifle behind. The question is always the same. Do you believe in yourself enough to keep going? George kept going. And because he kept going, 11 Japanese snipers died. 74 more died at the hands of his students. Thousands of American soldiers lived because the enemy was too terrified to move during daylight. One man, one decision, one mail-order rifle. That is the power of refusing to quit. And there is one final detail that most people do not know. John George lived to see the United States fight 3 more wars after World War II. Korea, Vietnam, the Gulf War. He watched the evolution of military rifles from the Garand to the M14 to the M16 to weapon systems he could not have imagined in 1943. He watched sniping become a formal military specialty, with dedicated schools and standardized equipment and recognition that would have seemed impossible when he was fighting in the Point Cruz groves. He lived quietly. He worked in diplomacy and education. He raised a family. He grew old in a country that had largely forgotten the Pacific War and the men who fought it. John George died on January 3, 2009. He was 93 years old. But before he died, he made one final decision about the rifle that had defined his life. The Winchester Model 70, serial number unknown, purchased through mail order in 1941, modified with a Lyman Alaskan scope and Griffin and Howe mount, carried from Illinois to Tennessee to Guadalcanal to India to Burma to Georgia. The rifle that killed at least 14 enemy soldiers in confirmed engagements, probably more. George stopped counting after Burma. He donated it to the National Firearms Museum in Fairfax, Virginia. It sits there today, in a display case, with a small placard describing its history. Most visitors walk past without stopping. It looks like any other vintage hunting rifle. Woodstock, bolt action, a scope that seems primitive by modern standards. They do not know what they are looking at. They do not know that this rifle proved a state champion marksman could outshoot professionally trained military snipers. They do not know that this rifle cleared the Point Cruz groves in 4 days when an entire battalion could not do it in 2 weeks. They do not know that this rifle changed how the American military thought about individual marksmanship. They do not know that the man who carried this rifle was mocked and dismissed and ordered to leave it behind. And they do not know that he carried it anyway. That is the final lesson of John George's story. Not the kills, not the medals, not the book that became a classic. The lesson is simpler than that. When everyone tells you that your idea is crazy, when the people in charge dismiss your skills, when the system has no place for what you can do, carry it anyway. From a state shooting champion with a mail-order rifle that everyone called garbage to the most successful sniper operation of the Pacific War. John George proved that one person with skill, determination, and the courage to ignore the doubters can change history. 11 snipers killed in 4 days. 74 kills by his trained students. A legacy that shaped American military doctrine for 80 years and counting. And a rifle in a museum that most people walk past without stopping. But now you know the story. Now you know what that rifle accomplished. And the next time someone tells you that your idea is crazy, that your skills do not matter, that you should leave your dreams behind and carry something more practical, remember John George. Remember the mail-order rifle. And carry it anyway. If this story moved, you share it with someone who needs to hear it. Someone who has been told their idea is crazy. Someone who is thinking about giving up. Someone who needs to know that the people who change the world are usually the ones who refuse to listen when everyone says it cannot be done. These stories matter. They deserve to be remembered. And somewhere in Fairfax, Virginia, a Winchester Model 70 sits in a display case waiting for someone to stop and read the placard. Waiting for someone to understand what it means. The rifle that proved them all wrong.